Good evening. It is March 16th, and this is the regular meeting of Troy City Council. I'm Marty Baker, President. Please silence your electronic devices for the duration of the meeting. We will begin with the Pledge of Allegiance, led tonight by Mr. John Schweizer, followed by the invocation. Please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we are a world that seeks and needs your peace. We ask that you guide the thoughts, words, and deeds of the world leaders so that we can all live as you intended, in peace. Watch over all those who serve in our armed forces and our first responders so that they may return home safely to their loved ones. We look for your wisdom as we deliberate our city's future tonight. To all this we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee. Here. Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Swayzer.
Here.
Mr. Heath.
Here.
Mr. Phillips.
Here.
Mr. Tremblay.
Here.
Mr. Kendall.
Here.
Mr. Twist.
Here.
Mrs. Oda.
Make a motion to excuse Mrs. Oda.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Kendall to excuse Mrs. Uda. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Mr. Swayzer.
Yes.
Mr. Heath.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay.
Yes.
Mr. Kendall.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee. Yes. Mrs. Oda is excused.
Mrs. Knight, please read a summary of the minutes of the March 2nd meeting of Troy City Council.
Minutes of Council, March 2, 2015. A public hearing was held on Resolution Number R6, 2015, an agricultural district application. Committee reports. Community and Economic Development Committee recommended that the final plat of Nottingham Estate Subdivision, Sections 8A and B, be accepted. Finance Committee recommended legislation be prepared to continue the 6 enterprise zone agreements as they are in compliance, as well as the Troy Town Park TIF. Committee recommended legislation be prepared approving a subordination of a mortgage lien with Joe and Kim Plants. Personnel Committee reported recommending that an assessment equalization board be appointed regarding the Streetscape 3B project, and that legislation be prepared for that. Resolution number R6, 2015, approving application of Sherry Mumpower for Agricultural District was given public hearing and first reading. Resolution number R7, 2015, accept recommendations of Tax Incentive Review Council was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R8, 2015, accept recommendations of Tax Incentive Review Council regarding the TIF district was given first reading and adopted. Resolution number R9, 2015, appoint Assessment Equalization Board, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 03, 2015, accept final plat of Nottingham subdivision, was given first reading and was adopted. Ordinance number 04, 2015, release mortgage liens for Bill and Becky Arthur due to loan being paid off, first reading and adopted. Ordinance number 05, 2015, mortgage lien for Jumpy's Laser Tag Kim and Joe Plant, subordination, was given first reading and adopted. Following various comments, council adjourned 7:30 p.m.
Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move to accept the minutes as read.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Phillips to accept the minutes. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swayzer.
Yes.
Mr. Heath.
Yes.
Mr. Phillips.
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay.
Yes.
Mr. Kendall.
Yes.
Mr. Twist.
Yes.
Mrs. Snee. Yes. Mr. Clark.
Yes.
Minutes are approved.
We'll move on to committee reports. The Community and Economic Development Committee met, and Chairman Mr. Bill Twist has their reports.
Thank you, Madam President. This committee met on March 10th. Following the provisions of the state law, on March 9th, the city was notified that an expedited Type 2 annexation petition was filed with the county for the annexation of a total of 34.469 acres in Staunton Township to the city of Troy. This land is in a total of 2 parcels owned by Harold E. Trader, located north of Troy-Urbana Road and east of DeWeese Road. And based on the state law section under which this annexation petition was filed and qualifies, there is a very short timeline for council to consider 3 separate pieces of legislation addressing what services the municipal corporation would provide to any parcel within the city, including that proposed for the annexation. A statement of buffering requirements and a legislation consenting or objecting to the annexation. Based on the timeline discussed in the detailed report, legislative action must be considered at the March 16th meeting. It is our recommendation of this committee that legislation be prepared approving the 3 legislative items required by state law related to the Trader annexation of 34.469 acres from Staunton Township. To meet the timeline of the state law for an expedited annexation, we understand this legislation will be submitted as an emergency measure. That is respectfully submitted by Tom Kendall, John Schweizer, and myself as chair, William Twist.
Are there any questions from council on this report? Do you have anything further, Mr. Twist?
Nothing at this time.
Thank you. Next, we have Law and Ordinance Committee and Chairman, Mr. John Schweizer.
Yes, ma'am, we have one report tonight. This committee met on March 5th to consider the application of Sheer M. Mumpower to continue to have 25.15 acres of ground located on the east side of Lytle Road be placed in an agricultural district. This is the 5th such application for this parcel of land. The application must be refiled every 5 years. The required public hearing was held on March 2nd with no comments received. It is the recommendation of this committee that legislation be approved, authorizing the placement of the Hines property on Lytle Road in an agricultural district. This was respectfully submitted by Mrs. Snee, Mr. Phillips, and myself as chair.
Do any council members have any questions on this report? Thank you, Mr. Schweizer. The Streets and Sidewalks Committee is next with their reports. Mr. Phillips?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have 3 reports this evening. On March 5th, this committee met to review the listing of streets and areas proposed for the 2015 paving program. This program includes the basic roadway paving program budgeted at $600,000, plus other areas of the city property for a total paving project of $176,000. A listing of the areas that we discussed are attached to the report. It was the recommendation of the committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2015 paving program in a total amount not to exceed $766,000. And this is respectfully submitted by Mr. Heath, Mrs. Snee, and myself as Chairman of the Streets and Sidewalks Committee.
Any questions from council? You may continue.
Thank you. Continuing on March 5th, this committee continued and met to review accepting a highway easement associated with the completion of the North Market Street, Piqua-Troy Road, Troy-Urbana Road intersection realignment project. The highway easement is provided by TTF Brown LLC at no cost to the city, and this is a total area of 0.431 acres. Recommendation of the committee is that legislation be prepared authorizing accepting the highway easement associated with the North Market Street, Piqua-Troy Road, Troy-Urbana Road intersection realignment project as provided on the attached plat map. And again, this is submitted by Mr. Heath, Mrs. Snee, and myself as chairman.
Are there any questions from council? Please continue.
Our last item was again heard on March 5th by this committee, meeting to review the bidding request for the McCaig Road Improvement Project, which was Phase 2. The project area is McCaig Road from Monroe Street to the railroad at Madison Street, including the area of the railroad crossing. The project scope includes roadway construction, utilities, LED traffic signal, retaining walls if necessary, and sidewalk, curb, and gutter. $450,000 of the project cost will be funded by a grant from the Ohio Public Works Commission, OPWC. The design has been finalized with an estimate of $1.142 million. This exceeds the budgeted amount due to the final design showing that the project area does not have storm sewers, which will need to be included. Also, the LED traffic light replacement was added, as well as the possibility of retaining walls. Funds are available within the applicable funds identified for this project. A reappropriation will be required so that funds are appropriated so a contract can be signed.
It is the recommendation of the committee that legislation be prepared authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the McCaig Road Improvement Project, Phase 2, at a cost not to exceed $1.142 million. And again, this is submitted respectfully by Mr. Heath, Mrs. Snee, and myself as chair.
Does council have any questions on this report?
Madam President,
Mr. Clark?
for Mr. Titterington, at the same time, will the railroad be renovating the crossing there?
We will be coordinating any work that they have to do so that we're not stepping on each other or anything that we do gets violated by their work and vice versa.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Phillips. Are there any other committee reports? We'll now open the meeting to citizen comments. There is a 2-minute time limit at this point in the meeting, and Mr. Livingston is our timekeeper. Does anyone in the audience have any questions or comments related to any of the agenda items this evening? If so, please come to the microphone and state your name and address before addressing council.
Lester Connor, 1210 South Clay Street, Troy, Ohio. My comments tonight are on the Mr. Trader, and I was wondering, has he notified any of the people out there yet?
I know that he does have, that's part of the process, that he needs to do that, Mr. Titterington.
I believe it's the county's responsibility to notify everybody who's adjacent. Will we do that too, or
It's Trader and his
I'm sorry,
attorney.
his attorney would have done
But
that.
he hasn't gotten back with you since you're voting tonight, whether or not he has notified any of the people?
That's not a requirement that he get back to the council.
Well, it looks to me like you're putting the cart before the horse on this deal. I mean, you're going to vote it in, and then you're taking the rights of all those citizens out there to have a comment on it. I just don't, it looks like another Stonebridge Meadows to me, where you have emergency legislation, there can be no referendum or anything. So it looks to me like you're falling right back into the same old thing again of emergency legislation, no referendum, don't have to talk to the people, we already voted it in, too bad, sorry. Thank you.
We are not approving any development out there at this point in time, correct, Mr. Titterington?
That's correct, and the, once it's annexed, assuming it's annexed, it continues to carry its county zoning. So any rezoning would be a separate action by council.
Thank you.
But once this property is zoned, if that man sells it to somebody else, then it's already zoned for that person to do whatever he wants with it.
But we're not rezoning yet at this point. We're just saying that if it does come into the city, we will provide municipal services. Anyone else in the audience have any comments at this point in time? Okay, we'll move on to resolutions then and ask Mrs. Knight to read Resolution R6, 2015.
Resolution number R6, 2015, resolution approving application of Sherry H. Mumpower to place land in agricultural district. This is 25.15 acres on Lytle Road. This land has been in an agricultural district for approximately 20 years, and this would be a continuation of that. This is the second reading.
Are there any questions from council on this resolution?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Move for adopt. Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Kendall to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R10, 2015.
Resolution number R10, 2015, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the 2015 paving program. The total cost of the program, not to exceed $766,000, includes the annual road paving program plus pavement of other areas of city property. This would be the first reading. All items are budgeted.
Are there any questions from council on this resolution?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes. Move for adoption.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Tremblay to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R11, 2015.
Resolution number R11, 2015, resolution authorizing the Director of Public Service and Safety of the City of Troy, Ohio, to advertise for bids and enter into a contract for the McCaig Road Improvement Project Phase 2, cost not to exceed $1,142,000. This will be offset by a grant from the Ohio Public Works Commission in the amount of $450,000. First reading.
Are there any questions from council on this resolution?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Phillips to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes. Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R12, 2015.
Resolution number R12, 2015, resolution establishing municipal services for certain territory containing 4.469 acres, more or less, in Staunton Township in the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is for the proposed trader annexation. By state law, the city must provide the county with a statement of services, and this is the first reading.
Any questions from council?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R13, 2015.
Resolution number R13, 2015, resolution establishing buffer requirements for certain territory containing 4.469 acres, more or less, in Staunton Township in the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This is also a piece of legislation required for the proposed trader annexation, again, requirement of the Ohio Revised Code that the city provides a statement of buffering based on the provision under which the annexation was filed. First reading.
Are there any questions from council on the resolution?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Twist to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Tremblay to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
The resolution is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read Resolution R14, 2015.
Resolution number R14, 2015, resolution consenting to the annexation of certain territory containing 34.469 acres, more or less, in Staunton Township to the city of Troy, Ohio, and declaring an emergency. This, again, is the proposed trader annexation based on the section of the Ohio Revised Code under which the proposed annexation was filed. This is a piece of legislation that council must provide to the county within a certain time frame. First reading.
Are there any questions from council on the resolution?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Clark to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes. Move for adoption.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Phillips and seconded by Mr. Twist to adopt the resolution. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
The resolution is adopted.
We'll move on to ordinances and ask Mrs. Knight to read Ordinance 06, 2015.
Ordinance number 06, 2015, ordinance accepting the dedication of a highway easement. This is a dedication of 0.431 acres to complete the intersection of North Market, Piqua Troy Road, and Troy Urbana Road. That is currently almost complete. This is the first reading.
Are there any questions from council on this ordinance?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Tremblay and seconded by Mr. Kendall to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes. Move for adoption. Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Schweizer to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mrs. Snee? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, please read our final ordinance of the evening, Ordinance 07, 2015.
Ordinance number 07, 2015, an ordinance establishing a new budget fund for reimbursements from the U.S. Department of Justice and declaring an emergency. This is the first reading. The city may be receiving funds under the Equitable Sharing Program from the U.S. Department of Justice. The State Auditor's Office requires that there be a separate fund set up for this, and this is the first reading.
Are there any questions from council on this ordinance?
Move for suspension.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Clark and seconded by Mr. Tremblay to suspend the rules. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee? Yes.
Move adopt. Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Schweizer and seconded by Mr. Phillips to adopt the ordinance. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Snee? Yes. Mr. Clark?
Yes.
The ordinance is adopted.
Mrs. Knight, are there any communications or announcements for council?
Just the reminder of filing financial disclosure statements, that is all.
Thank you. Mayor Beamish, do you have any comments this evening?
Well, thank you, Madam President. Just about 3 items. One is just a reminder, our annual State of the City will be held March 30th at the end of this month. The Mayor's Youth Council met, and you have a copy of their results. This is something I've done for years, along with what teen leaders think, and we also get information from Leadership Troy. This is the 5th and 6th graders' rendition of what they see as good about our community and what can be improved. And so I just presented you with their statistics and for you just to peruse and look at, as well as we'll share that with staff as well. The other point, and I pass this around, as you all know, in light of the tragedy that occurred with the Bishop family, there's been a number of different businesses and donated contributions that have been going into funds. One of those funds is to provide through the Troy Foundation CO detectors to those who request that, with the idea that our fire department would have a set model and they would be willing to install correctly into the homes requested. Those funds are secured, and again, thank you to all the businesses and the private donations that have made that happen. I passed the sample around earlier for you to take a look at, but also Assistant Chief Simmons is with us today. And for those who are interested afterwards, and for the audience as well, I'm sure Assistant Chief Simmons will be glad to show up close and personal how those things operate. Am I right, Chief?
Right.
Thank you very much. And we've done this for bike helmets. We've done this for smoke detectors. The positive feature of this piece of equipment will be it's both a smoke and CO activated piece of equipment. So it should be a very life-saving addition to those who wish those for their homes. Anything else, Chief, Assistant Chief?
No, just we've got a good supply and we were able to meet the demand so far. So.
Thank you. Thank you. That is all. That is all.
Thank you. Director of Public Service and Safety, Mr. Titterington.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on that, I think it's important that we acknowledge that we received a donation of 200 of those units from Meyer and First Alert, their partnership. And that's why, as Acting Chief Simmons mentioned, that we are currently meeting demand, and it's because of their donation as well as the monetary donations that we are seeing in at the Troy Foundation. A couple of other brief items related to the North Market, Troy-Urbana intersection ongoing project. The cliff, as I don't really like to call it, but that's really what it is. I continue to encourage people to go 25 miles an hour, not 35 miles an hour. It's easy to forget that. But you may see work begin on that project as early as tomorrow, weather permitting. It will not be in the intersection itself, but it'll be off-road for now to get some prep work done. We don't anticipate that the asphalt plants will open before the end of April, but we want to be ready in case they do. Part of the finishing of that project will be to continue some regrading of that hill and to build that up and to smooth that out, so that once that project is done, that will be a safe and well-constructed intersection. The final item, just as a heads up, at the end of March, we've been notified that perhaps at the end of March, CSX will begin doing some maintenance and repair work at each of the railroad crossings in town. We are still working out the schedule. We are still communicating with CSX to see which ones they want to do when and how we will handle any detours and for how long, discouraging them from doing connected or adjacent crossings, so that while we have detours, we are not running people all over town. And some of that will be affected by the Ohio Department of Transportation, who will be helping coordinate that with CSX, because several of those crossings are on the state routes, and at least one of them has a current detour running through town from as far north as Route 36 in Piqua area. So that's all I have. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Director of Law, Mr. Livingston.
Nothing this evening, Madam President.
Thank you. City Auditor, Mr. Stickle. Any comments?
I have no comments, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. A couple of follow-up items. There was work being done in the quadrants. Is that all completed now?
Don't believe it's all completed yet, but we have done the work that's underground, the clean-outs of the pipe themselves, but we still have some work to be done in the catch basin areas, the catch basins, I guess, in the road. But we'll continue to coordinate that. The roads will remain open, but it may be constricted to one lane at the quadrant, one at a time.
Okay. And then the ITW Hobart Brothers demolition, is that on schedule? And
All we understand, it is on schedule, and I'm not sure about the date, but fairly soon, I think once the weather balances out, maybe stabilizes, is when you should see some seeding and strawing.
Okay, thank you. Do any other council members have comments? Mr. Phillips.
Thank you, Madam President. I don't know whether Mr. Mayor or Mr. Titterington or Chief Simmons, the CO fund, does it need additional donations, or is what?
To sustain it, to continue, correct me if I'm wrong, but that fund will stay in existence to continue. But right now, thanks to the businesses, it's really been a positive response.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's all I need to thank you.
Anyone else on council?
Madam President.
Mr. Clark?
Yeah, I want to thank Mr. Dando and staff for the update on the Troy Enterprise Zone program. And I just want to share just a little bit of the verbiage that has been provided to us with regard to the Enterprise Zone. His report, and it says, in 2005, the Ohio Legislature revised the tax code, reducing and eventually eliminating the tangible property taxes on industrial machinery, et cetera. That greatly reduced the benefits of the EASY program, which led to voluntary termination of many EASY Enterprise Zone project agreements by 2010. And it goes on to say the most recent was Enterprise Zone Agreement number 34 for ConAgra's building addition for expansion of their school lunch frozen pizza slices production line. And currently there are 6 Enterprise Zone agreements in place for 5 different companies. And the total employment goal for the 5 companies is 2,132 full-time equivalent employees. And as of December 31st, 2012, the companies reported 2,940 jobs on their payroll, exceeding their total goal by 58%. This is exclusive of temporary workers and temp to hires on staffing agency payrolls. And it just shows this is a significant factor in the economic health of our community. It makes a tremendous difference, and it's one of those programs that very little is said about. But until you really, if you're in business, you really don't hear a lot about it. So it's really made a lot of difference for our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members of council, any comments?
Madam President.
Yes, Mrs. Snee.
A follow-on question about the ITW Hobart site, if Mr. Terrington could answer. If any more trees are going to be taken out around that at the same time that seeding is being done?
We're not anticipating any at this point, although with the thaw, I know the park department will go out and re-examine those to make sure that they're safe.
Okay, thank you. That's all.
Madam President,
Mr. Clark?
just to follow up on what Mrs. Snee had to say, if they do take more trees out, will they replace them?
Eventually, we would anticipate that with the redevelopment as part of the landscape, we had intended on making that a condition. Now, depending on what happens, how it's redeveloped, that may be a council decision as part of a planned development if that's how it progresses.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? Okay. Do any staff members have any comments this evening? Anyone in the audience have any comments? Please come to the microphone and state your name and address.
My name is Doug Sutherland. I live in 1565 Troy Better Road. I have a couple of questions on the proposed 34-acre plus or minus annexation process going on. And I'm an effective property owner, and I have a adjacent residence to that property. Do we know, is it all going to be a residential area? And if so, what size homes or price range or lot sizes are involved in this proposed development?
I'll defer to Mr. Titterington to answer that, please.
Just to be clear, all this would do is bring the property into our corporate limits. It would not rezone the property at all, so it would continue to have its current county zoning. If the property owner would want to rezone and develop that property, they would have to come back to the Planning Commission, who would recommend something to the council, and then council would act on a rezoning separately. So there are no development plans, residential, industrial, commercial, nothing being planned and talked about. This is simply just an annexation.
Okay. Also, if I have
Sure.
a follow-up question. Under emergency, when you start filling out emergency 20-day, we must get this thing done, you kind of get some of the residents worried about what are they trying to push through, or with the landowners. Not that I have anything about development. I just want to know, is it intention to be developed as a residential area?
Honestly, sir, this came to us from the property owner through the county. The 20 days and it's called an expedited annexation. There are two processes that are laid out in the state law. They chose to file it under the expedited process, and that's where the 20-day window comes in. That wasn't something that we chose or that we recommended to the council. That's how it was filed, and so since it was filed that way, we have to follow that process.
Okay. So we won't know until further paperwork is filed by the property owner.
That's
what his
correct.
plans are.
Our subdivision regs, our zoning code requires that an annexation has to happen separately, and then anything they want to do with it, if they want to rezone it and bring it to zoning, city zoning, that has to happen later. And nothing's been filed, no application or anything to do that.
Again, we'll know in a further or future council meeting.
Right, that has to
Anything else
follow a zoning process, which includes a public notification and planning commission recommendation, and the council has a public hearing. So that's a drawn-out process that would happen later if it happens.
Okay, thank you very much for answering my
Thank you.
questions.
Mr. Titterington, as I recall from the committee meeting, this also has to go back to the county and they have to approve it.
It's our understanding, yes.
Okay.
Any other comments?
Lester Connor, 1210 South Clay Street, Troy, Ohio. I don't know if you all read the Sunday paper or the outcome of the survey that they took, but it looks like the citizens that did participate in the survey weren't in favor of the marina. So everybody that I talked to up here said, everybody we talked to said they're for it. So, and like I keep telling you, you need to talk to people that ain't wearing ties. You need to talk to the regular citizens of Troy and see how they feel about it. Well, they answered the survey just a little bit late. You all okayed it. It's in the process. It's running downhill again, so we're stuck with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Okay. Like to wish everyone a happy St. Patrick's Day.
Yeah. Madam President.
Mr. Kendall.
If I may, would like to make a motion that this body retire into executive session to consider confidential information related to the marketing plan, specific business strategy, production techniques, trade secrets, or personal financial statements of an applicant for economic development assistance, which information is directly related to a request for economic development assistance that is to be provided or administered under the provisions of Chapter 5709.61 of the Ohio Revised Code that involves public infrastructure improvements or the extension of utility services that are directly related to an economic development project and is necessary to protect the interests of the applicant or the possible investments or expenditure of public funds to be made in connection with the economic development project.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Clark to retire into the executive session. And do I need to read this? Okay. To consider confidential information related to the marketing plans, specific business strategy, production techniques, trade secrets, or personal financial statements of an applicant for an economic development assistance, which information is directly related to a request for economic development assistance that is to be provided or administered under the provision of Chapter 5709.61 of the Ohio Revised Code that involves public infrastructure improvements or the extension of utility services that are directly related to an economic development project and is necessary to protect the interests of the applicant or the possible investment or expenditure of public funds to be made in connection with the economic development project. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
The motion is approved.
Okay. We will be returning after the executive session for adjournment. We do not expect any action planned following the executive session. So, thank you very much.
I'd like to make a motion that we reconvene.
Second.
It's been moved by Mr. Kendall and seconded by Mr. Twist to reconvene into regular council. Mrs. Knight, please call the roll.
Mr. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Tremblay?
Yes.
Mr. Kendall?
Yes.
Mr. Twist?
Yes.
Mrs. Sneed?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Mr. Swazer?
Yes.
Mr. Heath?
Yes.
Motion is approved.
Thank you all for attending tonight's meeting. Have a safe and peace-filled week. Meeting adjourned.